Next up, we've got Brian Flaherty, who's going to talk about departures from standard and road safety improvement schemes. Brian is a chartered civil engineer with over 10 years' experience in the road construction industry. He's currently an executive engineer within the Kildare National Roads Office and previously worked for the motorway maintenance and renewal contractor and in design consultancy. Okay, Brian.
Good morning, everyone. As said, my name is Brian Flaherty. I'm an executive engineer in Kildare National Roads Office, and together with my colleague Éanna Fallon, we've been assisting TII with the review of geometric departures from standards for the past 6 months. So today we'll just briefly touch on the departure from standards publication GN 01005. So just touch on what is a departure, the outcomes of a departure review process, gaining access to the departures portal, and some common issues that we have seen over the past 6 months. And then we'll touch on the submission of design reports in accordance with DNGO 03030, the design phase procedure for road safety improvement schemes, urban renewal schemes and local improvement schemes. Again, just touch on what's involved with the report, the information that's required, and again, some common issues that are resulting in rejected departure applications. So what is a departure from standard? So you'll all likely know this, but just to cover it, a departure from standard is defined as a deviation from the requirements of TII standards and may mean any of the following, which is just extracted from the document, so I won't read through it. What you're more likely interested in is the outcome of any departure applications that you may have submitted via the online departures application portal. So once a departure is received, it's reviewed by TII. So in the case of geometric departures from standards, that will be myself or Éanna. For other streams, they'll be directed to other parties within TII. So it can be one of three outcomes. It can be accepted, meaning it's acceptable to use the proposed solution under the circumstances that have been outlined within that departure application form. It can be refused, so a departure that's unacceptable to TII for incorporation into a design. Or a departure can be rejected, so a departure that has insufficient, inappropriate or contradictory information that just results in an inconclusive decision. In this case, the application will be returned to the applicant, and then they can resubmit with further information to address any of the queries. And just to note that all departures should be or must be accepted by TII prior to incorporation into design, and acceptance cannot be given retrospectively. So, as mentioned, all departures are submitted via the TII departures application portal, which the homepage is the main image on the screen. So to register as a user and gain access, you need to email infodeps@tii.ie. Once this is done, you'll be linked to an online registration form, which is the image in the bottom right corner. So this will just request some basic information. So general user information, it's the name of the applicant, company details and email address, relevant road authority contact, which is required for each application. You'll have the option to add some additional users if there's more than one person who will be uploading applications. And then finally, just some project information. So if it's a design report to DNGO 3030 or not, the type of project and the project name. And just the project name input here will be used to set up a user group, so just ensure it's kind of approved project title given. So once all users are registered by the departures manager, a user group will be set up, and then users will be invited to join that user group. So you'll receive an automated email that will look like this, and then this will be followed up with an email from IT just to confirm that your registration has been set up. You'll be linked to the departures application portal, and we just ask that you, when you receive this, that you actually try to access the portal at that time, just to see if there's any issues, rather than waiting a couple of weeks till the last minute that the application needs to go in and then discover that there's an issue. So once you receive this, if you can just jump in and make sure you have access just to avoid any issues further down the line. There is a user manual available under the download section of TII Publications, so on the right hand side of the downloads tab, and then it's under the departures from standards. So again, worth having a quick read through just to details how to run through the portal and submit an application, and might just address some issues. So just a couple of common issues. Just one in relation to uploading documents. So once you've put in your departure information, you actually have to park the application and come out of it and go back in prior to uploading documents. Then just common issue, so a departure just submitted prematurely. Could be a note within the text to say, pending landowner discussions, we might be able to set a hedgerow back and therefore we won't need the departure. That's premature to come in, so that will be returned. No supporting information, no drawings, which are generally required on all submissions. The wrong standard is selected, or a misquoted reference within the application. And then just the departure application centre point. So I think this is probably occurring with people trying to manually input the coordinates. So the easiest way, just select it on the map. It doesn't need to be millimetre precision and avoids any issue. So now just design reports in accordance with DNGO 3030. So as Virginia mentioned, so this standard is to be used for the design phase of all schemes on national roads, whether funded by TII or not, which have design elements which have a cost estimate of less than €5 million and which are not otherwise being progressed in accordance with the procedure set out in TII project management guidelines. So this includes road safety improvement schemes. So where a design report is received for a road safety improvement scheme, we will liaise with the relevant regional road safety engineer just to discuss it. Any design elements of a power scheme. So if that power scheme might include the addition of a ghost island, right turning lane, or near side passing bay, just any element that means the road will operate differently than how it did prior to the scheme, that element of works should be submit as a design report. Urban renewal schemes in accordance with DMERS and local improvement schemes. Just a table extracted from the publication, just highlighting some examples where your design report is required. So commercial development being promoted by a private entity, a greenway that crosses a national road, an upgrade to an existing junction, or the introduction of a near side passing bay as part of a power scheme. And again, all examples are schemes with a cost estimate below 5 million. So the design report is required to address and present issues relating to compliance with the relevant parts of the TII publications. The design report are submitted via the TII portal. So again, registration and access is as outlined in GEGN 01005 and as discussed earlier. They should be submitted prior to any statutory processes, and to assist with the preparation of reports, there are sample reports available. These are linked within 3030 document and are available again at the downloads tab on TII Publications under the sample design reports and appendices in accordance with DNGO 3030. So just the report itself, this is an example of the content, what's required. I won't run through it all, but we'd recommend that you follow this. If headings aren't relevant, it can be just marked as not applicable, or headings can be added into the report as deemed necessary. Then just focus on the appendices. Required include design drawings, which should be updated to include any comments raised in the road safety audit. The road safety audit itself, which must have the signed feedback form included, total scheme budget, project appraisal balance sheet, individual departure application forms where they're required, and a DMERS compliancy statement where applicable. And just again, some common issues we're seeing kind of repeatedly. The report format is just varies significantly from what the sample is, and just does not contain enough information for a detailed review to be complete. the design drawings are coming in without the RSA comments being incorporated, or else just insufficient detail provided on the design drawings. The road safety audit, not including the signed feedback form. Where an exceptions report is required for the road safety audit, this has to be approved by TII prior to the design report being accepted. And then just inappropriate road safety audit being complete. So stage 2 is appropriate for the majority of schemes we're seeing coming in, and with just a lot of stage 1 audits coming in which just aren't, given complexity of schemes, aren't appropriate. The departure application forms themselves, they might be referenced within the body of a report, but the individual forms need to be complete and included as an appendix. Again, the departure centre point is same as previous, just selected on the map. It's the easiest way to do it. Relevant design standard, so this is the most common issue we're seeing. So any report being submitted under 3030 is the relevant standard that needs to be selected in the drop-down list. What we're seeing is people are selecting the relevant design standard. So in the example with the red box, it's the junction design standard, because that's the departure they're applying for within the design report. But for recording purposes, all design reports need to be submitted under 3030, and publication, that's the publication that needs to be selected. And then finally, just active travel, any design reports containing active travel facilities, we're just seeing a lack of detail being provided. Suzanne will touch on that in more detail, but yeah, just consultation with the cycle design manual is recommended. So that's everything. Just sample reports, the departures user manual, all available from TII Publications download section. Any queries in relation to departures, registration, access should be directed to infodeps@tii.ie, and that's everything. Thank you.
Okay, so next up is Roman Swan, who's going to talk to us about cultural heritage guidelines. Roman's an archaeologist with 31 years experience. He's head of archaeology and heritage with TII, having previously worked as a project archaeologist in Westmeath and RDO. And prior to that, 10 years experience in archaeological consultancy and heritage projects. He has a postgraduate diploma in project management from TCD, a master's in archaeological computing from the University of Southampton, and a BA in archaeology and geography from UCB. Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks for, excuse me. I have a slight frog in the throat, so bear with me. Thanks, Jonathan. What I'd like to do over the next 25 minutes or so is just to introduce you all to the Cultural Heritage Impact Assessment Guidelines that were published there back in February of this year. Now, the guidelines, the purpose of the guidelines and the target audience guidelines are the cultural heritage professionals, and they're very much written with them in mind, setting up what we want to expect them to do. But I want to take the opportunity, talking to you here today as project managers, is to highlight areas where of direct relevance for yourselves in managing these contracts and being involved in these contracts and seeing these contracts on your various schemes. So one of the things I want to do is just kind of get a little bit of a deep dive into it, look at areas of key responsibilities for yourselves, and then also go and look at some of the key implications following on. Just to sort of remind ourselves, TI Archaeology and Heritage, our primary purpose is to minimise the archaeological and heritage impacts of associated TI's capital projects and programmes. And we do that with reference to sort of three broad components: legislation, regulation, EIA directives, the National Miners Act, and I'll come back to those in a little while, risk, financial management, time management, etc., and then also public trust. And I think there's been several talks today which have spoken about the public, general public as a key stakeholder, and that'll be very much in keeping with our own attitudes and beliefs. One of our fundamental documents for managing archaeology is our Code of Practice. It supersedes an original one back in 2000, and that's one which you'll see in any of the PMG, PMM. When it refers to Code of Practice, it's referring to this document here, and that's setting up the rules of engagement between ourselves and the Minister for Heritage and especially the National Monuments Service. And essentially that sets out the commitments TII is making in terms of delivery of our projects. So we use that on a sort of daily basis, and that's the base which we go back to, and very much as sort of like a foundational document when it came to developing the guidelines. The other thing I'll say about the code of practice is it takes a sort of a whole life approach. It's not just about digging the archaeology, digging sites out of the ground. It's also about ensuring that all the follow-on work is done and that those results are made, sort of fed back to the general public. Looking, why do we need new guidelines? Well, the last set were in 2005, so I figure 21 years later is probably a good time to kind of revisit them. And, they're, shall we say, the original guidelines served us well, but there's been a lot of practice over the past 21 years. A lot of changes have taken place, and a lot of good practice has taken place, and we want to codify that. We want to capture that practice. We also want to take on board that the original guidelines were about archaeology and architectural heritage. They didn't speak to a lot of the, shall I say, that broader cultural heritage piece, and I'll go into it in a little bit more detail, but it's to give voice to that and to give some guidance as to how we address that. Another thing that I suppose it's important for you to know, these guidelines will be applicable wherever there's a planning consent in place, or we're going for planning consent with TI as approving authority, sponsoring agency or funder. Then we'll be looking to have these guidelines. Guidelines themselves also reflect wider developments. In particular, there's legislation mentioned in the National Monuments Act. Last year we had the Historic and Archaeological Heritage and Miscellaneous Provisions Act was finally enacted in November 2023, but that still hasn't come into force. So we're still waiting on commencement of that, which means we're in this little bit of a limbo period. We did develop the guidelines with that change in mind, so they're sort of future-proofed, but it's something to keep an eye on. Another, should I say, take on board issues is the things like the EPA 2022 Environmental Impact Assessment guidelines, so as to bring them into alignment with those, as well as, of course, the PMG and PMM. Some of the key principles, excuse me, some of the key principles that we had underlining these, the development of these guidelines, it was done very much to try to bring it up to date in accordance with TI Sustainability Implementation Plan, and again also to make sure that we're actually capturing that good practice, that best practice that we're seeing on all of our schemes. As something a line that I use quite a bit is that it's evolution, not revolution. So that when your cultural heritage practitioners, tech advisors are coming and saying, oh, these are completely different guidelines, they're actually reflecting practices that have come on board in the past couple of years. There's actually taking on board those concerns. So they're not radically different, but they are codifying it. They are we want to lead to consistency, we want to lead to greater clarity. And that's to make it easier for the technical advisors to price for these works, and it's also to make it easier for us, project architects, project managers, to see, to have a clear understanding of where the work is going and what we can expect at the end. Another key thing underlying the guidelines is our relationship between the project manager and the project archaeologist. You'll see throughout the document the phrase project manager in conjunction with the project archaeologist. And we expect the project archaeologist to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting, to be doing a lot of the legwork on it, but that's to ensure that they're feeding that information back to yourselves as project managers so that you've got that oversight going on. And just to, shall I say, take a step back for a second about cultural heritage, like we're all familiar with that archaeology and architectural heritage piece. What's a little bit new is that notion of that cultural heritage in that broader sense, and that can be our sporting heritage, it can be heritage related to the decade of centenaries, it can be those pieces of, whether it's a public sculpture, whether it's like Lewis Cross City has a taxi driver shrine on O'Connell Street. That was incredibly important to them. There's other schemes around the country, like crosses from the 1930s, 1940s, and things that may have no particularly religious value, but these things can have an immense community value. And it's really important that through the cultural heritage piece, we can actually capture that community value through the process. And by capturing that those items of community value, it means that we can consider them in our designs. And sometimes we are going to have to take them out. Sometimes we are going to have to impact on them. But at least we do it within a considered approach. At least we can then go back to the communities and explain what's going on, rather than I heard of one piece where somebody said, "Oh well, that item that's not on a designation, so therefore it's no meaning." Now, in fact, it wasn't designated to the local people in that area. It was irrelevant. It had meaning to them. And I think that the cultural heritage area allows us to kind of feed into that. And I think it's important that as project managers in the design offices and NROs around the country in local authorities, you've got a direct link into that local community that technical advisors, cultural heritage professionals won't. So you will see things and you'll notice things that should be incorporated, should be on the lists, and to actually bring that knowledge to bear, and not to undersell or underplay, or not to sort of say, "Oh well, we'll leave it to them to do." They may not know that, and I'd encourage everyone, if you do know something there, bring it in, let's consider it within the process. And again, before we kind of even start, I should say, cultural heritage should be considered from the outset. So when we start doing the projects, we should think about how are we going to deal with cultural heritage. And we're going to, project archaeologists going to be assigned phase 0 for greenways, phase 1 for national roads. And it's essential that the project archaeologist, in conjunction with yourselves, are developing those specifications for the cultural heritage, for the technical advisor, for them to employ the cultural heritage professional. And I think that discussion is going to set up the guardrails. It's going to say, what works do we expect to be carried out? What works do we expect the cultural heritage professional to carry out? What works do we expect the cultural or the technical advisor to manage? Could be a geophysical survey, could be LiDAR, doesn't matter, but to actually capture those. So it's getting that piece done at a project outset. And that's going to allow the technical advisors to price the tenders effectively. Just going to show you the table of contents here. A couple of things which I think are important, a couple of your chapters there. We'll go into that issue around roles and responsibilities. Project archaeologist, project manager, cultural professional, etc. There's also kind of goes through the process there in terms of actually how does this cultural heritage impact assessment process work? How does it work through different phases? And then there's also key information of what we expect the cultural heritage professional to be providing us. We've also put in there a series of sort of useful aids, these sort of information, these boxes throughout the document. You'll see a few of them in my presentation. And they're just sort of like useful crutches or supports for you going through it to get you to the key information. So, impact assessment, what does it deal with? Well, it's a process for identifying and assessing the effects on cultural heritage, and where necessary, developing measures to mitigate the adverse effects and enhance potential positive effects. And I think that actual enhancement piece, that opportunity piece, and particularly when we're talking about greenways and active travel projects, that's where we can actually see cultural heritage actually being able to provide some enhancements and opportunities for the public. And I think it's something that we should always be mindful of. It's going to require a little bit of a sea change in the thinking of the cultural heritage professionals to start thinking about opportunities. Currently, they often think about, it's the negative aspects. We've got to try to encourage them to start looking that way. The process itself, very straightforward. Everyone's become familiar with it. Identify your receptors. Identify what the potential effects of those impacts of those receptors are. Identify what the significance of those effects are, and then identify your mitigations. That's the process. This is not rocket science. It's not completely brand new. So the cultural heritage professionals should be able to work with it, and the technical advisors should be as well. So again, the 4-step process, a little more detail. Your first step, establish your scope. What's the study area? What are your route assessment corridors? The second step, data analysis, that's collation. Getting those surveys carried out at particular phases, then making sure that those surveys are available for your third step, that assessment. What is assessing the actual impact, assess the importance of that impact as well, or seriousness of that impact, and then your step 5, mitigation and enhancement. Graphically, you can see here, sort of phase 1, we're not expecting, we'll have the project archaeologists on board at that point. Phase 2, we'll get a cultural heritage professional on board, and we'll expect them to start working through that step process. In the phase 2, stage 1 and stage 2, we expect the mitigation piece there to be around avoidance. designing sites out. And that's what we're doing anyway, but we're not actually necessarily cataloguing, we're not recording the fact that sites are being, that these impacts are being designed out, but I think it is a good thing to do. Phase 3, or Phase 2, Stage 3, we don't expect any cultural producer to be doing any works during that phase. Now, on occasion, it's necessary to do so, but that'll be instructed by yourselves as project manager. And then Phase 3, when you're developing, designing the preferred route, we're going to be getting down to the mitigation there, and avoidance, preservation, etc. that we'll discuss shortly. And then Phase 4, statutory processes. There's another sort of a change which we're sort of introducing, and this is something that past number of years we've had a lot of the practice has emerged that people are using GIS, but we want to actually really ensure that they are doing it. We have heard, I say about 89% of the consultants are using it. There's a small cohort who aren't, and we really want to drive that, use GIS. It's going to be more efficient, more effective, and easier for them to actually deliver it. The other thing we want them to be thinking about is not just have points on a map, but also actually identify the areas that are going to be impacted. And sometimes that means that you may have a site on the edge of your study area. That's actually quite a large area, domain, World Heritage area, and you're going to actually incorporate that into it. And when you're actually bring that on board, it's to, if we're actually looking at it from an aerial point of view, or an area point of view, it means we're going to get greater, shall I say, clarity, greater focus on how we're going to approach in terms of mitigating sites. As we work our way through the various phases and stages, one thing we do want them to do is to document the importance. We want the cultural professionals to actually be saying, giving of importance from each of the phases as it goes through, based on the information available. And that's kind of gone back to the guardrails that are put in place through the project archaeology, identifying what services we require. And we've set up a, this menu of options on what you call it in the document, and it just shows you through the phases what are source of information we expect to be done at each phase, and then also what additional surveys do we expect to take place. Again, going back to Virginia's talk earlier on, there's a proportionality piece that we want to get across. We don't necessarily have to have every single thing carried out. So when we're just looking at the tasks, services, sources, fieldwork we want to be carried out, it should be proportionate to the nature of the scheme and also proportionate to the baseline importance of the archaeology there. I had a conversation at lunch with some colleagues from Sligo, and we were talking about Loch October. Very small scheme, but there's a whole lot of archaeology there. So even small schemes can have a huge amount of archaeology. You could have a much larger scheme with minimal impacts, and therefore it's that proportionality piece and that professional judgment piece that's going to be called in. You'll see there as well, Phase 2, Stage 3, we're not expecting anything except if it's required by the project manager. In terms of methodologies, one thing which again these guidelines have tried to pick up is the introduction of new things that have come along in recent years. Many of you will have seen over the past number of years the use of LiDAR. It's becoming ubiquitous on our projects. Flowing from the TII research project or research program, we have recently published a machine learning tool that was actually presented at TRA about 2 weeks ago. And that tool is taking LiDAR data, processing it through an online application you can download in a second, and it allows you to actually spits out a whole GIS compatible layers identifying potential archaeological sites that can be incorporated into designs. And again, it's something that we'd expect to be done at Phase 2 because it'll actually minimise the risks later on. That's the QR code. I think it's the last QR code of the day. Myself and I'd have a conversation there. So just in terms of methodologies, spoke about LiDAR. These are typical methodologies. LiDAR has become ubiquitous. That's generally a service that's been, the analysis of that has been, shall I say, collection of the data has been outsourced, and also the analysis has been outsourced. So that's the kind of service we wanted to flag up in that technical advisor brief. Our Phase 3 walkover, that's going to be up to your preferred route. That's going to be carried out by a cultural professional, and that's going to be carried out on all of, on all our schemes. We'll have that. We'll have our archaeogeophysical surveying, and those sort of surveys are generally going to be procured often procured by the technical advisor on behalf of the client, on behalf of the roads authority. Other surveys we can have, target testing. There may be questions that we have coming up through the route selection process that is giving, say, a choice between taking somebody's house out on the one hand or excavating out a graveyard, excavating a burial ground. And before you decide to totally fundamentally change somebody's life by CPOing their house on behalf of a potential archaeological site, you may want to actually establish whether or not there is an archaeological site there. So there may be circumstances, and we have done it over the years, of doing that sort of target testing during the design process, and that's a not unusual one. We may also have metal detecting and other surveys carried out, but we should be looking at those technical advisor briefs to capture what we want to do. Some of these, shall I say, process we've introduced is creating codified as practice, and one of the key documents we're introducing is the concept of assessment method statements. Now, they have been used for the past 3 years in different projects around the country, so they're not completely brand new, but essentially the assessment method statements are at the beginning of each phase, beginning of each stage works. They're the who, where, why, when, how. They're basic documents. They're capturing those assumptions, they're capturing the methodologies, and they're the baseline that we can use, project managers, project archaeologists can use to ensure that we're actually getting what we want at the outset. So before people start doing a whole lot of work and we discover that they've used incorrect assumptions, we want to use the method statements to shake out those assumptions early on and make sure that we're going to get what we expect. We've then got our different outputs there through the stage 2. That's the what you call it, analysis phase or assessment phase, analysis phase and that collation phase. Bring all that information, all the reports together and making them available, populating cultural data set, populating our GIS. Then we're getting into our stage 3 analysis, assessment I should say, and that's when it's taking place at that point. Those are your EIAR chapters, they're your reports, they're all feeding into the overall EIAR. And at that point, we're then flowing on to our step 4, and that's our mitigation. Just before we go to mitigation, just want to briefly touch on significance of effect. And again, we're just capturing a process there that the baseline importance of those sites, whether it's a phase 2, phase 3. And again, as we work through the process, we're going to get more and more information, which means we'll have greater refinement on what our understanding of those sites. We have our baseline importance, we look at the magnitude of impact, and then that leads to significance of effect. And that significance of effect is based on the EPA guidelines being adapted for cultural heritage. And really, we're looking at the significance for everything above, not significance to your slight, and above, there should be some recommendation as to what we expect to be done. Some mitigation should be going in there. And this has been taking place essentially for the past 20 years. There's nothing particularly strange about it, but it is just having it documented there. Mitigation measures that we have. Again, we've got our primary mitigation is arising through design. And we're really, like a lot of the design phases are all going to be about how can we identify potential constraints and how can we design them out. And in some cases we're going to be able to successfully design them out, in other cases we're not. If we can't successfully design them out, then we want to ensure that in the contracts that we have going into phase 5, and 6 and 7, in those contracts that we're actually putting in measures. So that can be exclusion zones, that can be fencing off, that can be communication. And that piece is essential because we have had incidents over the past number of years where there's been a breakdown in communication and we've had archaeological sites being tracked over, sites which have protection being tracked over, and that's something which we want to avoid. So there is a communication piece there. There's also measures around screening, planting, etc. we're all familiar with. And then when those measures aren't applicable, then we've got our remedy and offset measures. And those are measures we're talking about: excavation of archaeological sites, excavation sites, our built heritage surveys, and so on. And then they also lead on to our amenity enhancement, our public realm enhancement measures. And that's something else that we can see. They also lead as well on to our making information available, whether it's through our digital heritage collections or whether it's through our books, reports, etc. So again, just avoidance. We avoid through the process, prevent where we can, reduce where we can, and then if we can't, excavate and so on. One point I'll make here is that we, unlike say some of the other constraints, we will not know all of the archaeological constraints. We'll have we'll capture the cultural heritage constraints, we'll capture the built heritage constraints, but we all know that from the archaeological constraints, we're not going to know all of them when we go into get consent. We have project, we're not going to know it. The board accepts that, the state accepts that it's just a reality that we can't. So we are going to be seeing items such as our central line trenching, our investigation phases taking place at phase 5, and that's just a standard, and it's not problematic. But other things that we've got going on in terms of mitigation, there's that opportunity piece around enhancement of public realm. There's also that opportunity piece, and I think greenways are really good for this, providing that when you can provide display boards, you can provide amenity, you can provide information to the users of those in a way that we just cannot do on a national road. You cannot provide like that, but you can actually provide in situ enhancement. One thing that has happened on national road schemes is, and we've seen it, is the provision of viewing areas on occasion. There are schemes that we have en route enhancements. They're perhaps not as, I know when we looked at this a number of years ago, back about 10 years ago, we looked at developing cultural heritage guidelines at the time, and the people that were saying we'd have sort of viewing platforms in every single route all the time. It's just impossible. But there's a common sense approach that is coming in place in some areas. Mechanisms by which we can achieve the mitigation. I've just thrown up here the stage 1 to 4 contracts for archaeology. That's one example of how we'll do a lot of it, taking that approach from site works right the way through to publication, dissemination, and ultimately to accessioning and archiving the material. But equally, our advanced works contracts, our main works contracts, should also be replicating these materials, these items as well as necessary. I think in general we deal with about 90% of the archaeology in advance on national contracts, and about 10% is left to monitoring. So that's something we just need to bear in mind. Okay, so just to kind of look at, say, specific roles and responsibilities. The key thing here I've just highlighted there on the right, some of the key points for PM, it's we need to determine the extent of our study areas, our assessment corridors at the outset. We then actually work our way through. We review and approve those assessment method statements. They're critical to ensure we have that clarity of what we know what we're going to get, and we're happy with that. We then have all of the outputs. So from the phase 1 to 4 works, again, PM in conjunction with PA to review and approve all of those phase 1 to 4 outputs. And then there's that final piece, the implementation of mitigation measures and then monitoring of that. So when you've got the cultural heritage professional, we'll be producing a cultural heritage mitigation plan, and that will help to inform the schedule of commitments at oral hearing, and then collectively that, along with all the other commitments coming from all the other disciplines, will lead to your construction environmental management plan. Just to, I mentioned here about the essential requirements boxes. These essential requirements really are there just to highlight what are the tasks we want to be completed at each phase, each stage, and what are the outputs that we expect. So I believe that the assessment statements should be reflective of these. That's the start and finish of them, that they should be reflective of those, and the granular detail will be captured in those method statements. And that goes right the way through for the different phases there. So, come up to the end, just to wrap up. We do want to make sure that the CHP is competent, and this is something that project manager and conjunction with project archaeologists, we assess that competence. And again, it's looking at it in the context of the, shall I say, proportionality to the nature of the project, the nature of the baseline information. We also want to make sure that the scope, the application, there's that proportionality pieces carried across as well. Another key item we want to make sure that we capture is that all those engagements with the local authority around protected structures, that they're also captured. Like that's, we've noticed from a number of recent schemes that that's absolutely critical. Similarly, when it comes to the permissions for the delivery of the archaeology, that's currently through directions and consent. and Section 26 licence, that they're also delivered. One other item which I'll just flag up here is that the current legislation allows for, in the event that a significant archaeological site, a national monument, is found during one of our schemes on an approved road scheme, that can trigger if it's found post-consent, that can trigger a new EIAR. We have never actually, that risk has never manifested itself, but it is still a risk that exists. The new legislation will probably approach that in a slightly different way, so I don't expect that risk to be carried forward into the new legislation. But at the moment, until that new legislation commences, it's something to bear in mind. And then there's just the other thing from the PMM, the deposition of the archaeological archives and artefacts. Some of the specific responsibilities, though, for project managers, well, there's a general one for the implementation of the guidelines. There's also that instruction piece. If it turns out that we do need additional works at phase 2, stage 3, then that's an instruction piece. There's that general piece around engagement or consultation with all relevant stakeholders, and there's the piece around ensuring that the material from the commitments in the cultural heritage mitigation plan are transferred across to the construction environmental management plan. And then, just to wrap up, a couple points to our takeaway. One overarching point: evolution or revolution. Another thing, that relationship between a project archaeologist and project manager, that's critical. If you've got any schemes that you don't have a project archaeologist, please call me and we'll have one assigned. The other thing is that we're also, when it comes to the applicability of the guidelines, as with all of the other guidelines out there, the applicability to schemes that are underway, that's going to be a decision between project manager, design team, project archaeologist, and that's going to take into the sort of the risk profile that attaches to the scheme at that particular time. And then that other item about the approval piece between all the outputs approved by the project manager in conjunction with project archaeologist. And then I'll just sort of say, these have been launched since in February, so we're going to see how they go on for the next couple of months. We welcome any feedback that you have, any comments you have on there, any issues that you identify with them. Please come back to myself. Please come back to my colleague Michael Stanley, and we will try to address them and try to take them on board. So, thank you very much.
So my name's Jenny Dunwoody. I'm leading on the preparation of a population and human health assessment for Transport Infrastructure Ireland. I work for ARUP. My specialism is in health impact assessment, and I'm working with colleagues who specialise also in population and community assessment. So just to sort of timing, we're expecting the publication of the standard in the autumn of this year. Ahead of that, we will be undertaking external consultation on the draft standard imminently and over the summer, with a long list of organisations who you can see on the slide there. That's just a sample of the organisations that we will be consulting on this standard. The preparation of the standard has included several drafts. We're on to our third draft now. We've worked closely with TII's environment team to develop the standard, and also with some of the other specialist consultants, including noise and air quality. There's been extensive peer review of this standard. We've had workshops with expert peer reviewers in health impact assessment, and also we've recently updated, or currently updating, the standard to reflect the revised TII project appraisal guidelines. So why do we need a population and human health assessment standard? The EIA directive in 2011 included an aim to ensure a high level of protection of the environment and human health. And then the 2014 amended directive was a bit more explicit. It listed specific topics that needed to be included, or at least considered, at the scoping stage. And one of those was population and human health, which replaced the previous wording of human beings. Finally, the vision as set out in TII Sustainability Implementation Plan includes enhancing the health and well-being of all people, including vulnerable groups. So the objectives of the standard, firstly, compliance. So to ensure compliance with the EIA directive and with the project management guidance and project appraisal guidance as well. To give a methodology that will ensure that the assessment is robust and proportionate, and also to provide evidence-based information to decision makers. So to make sure that health and population are properly considered during both the options selection stage and also the determination of the project. And finally, to incorporate mitigation and enhancement measures, and importantly, and hopefully, to improve the population and human health outcomes of the project. The standard will be used, required to be used for projects requiring approval under Section 51 of the Roads Act, also under the Planning and Development Act and Part 8 development, so under Part 8 of the Planning and Development Regulations. But the standard may also be used for other projects as well. So it could be used as a guide, for example, in assessing things like active travel routes and greenways. There's a requirement in the EIA directive that the developer shall ensure that the EIAR is prepared by competent experts. There's no definition of what competent experts actually means, and it's ultimately the responsibility of the applicant to satisfy the decision-making authority that the people that have produced the assessment are adequately competent. So there's just some information here to guide the to help to come to that conclusion on competence. There's no one particular qualification or threshold. There's lots of different routes into population and human health assessment. It's a very broad topic. So backgrounds can vary. For example, for health, it could be public health and epidemiology, medicine, and also a lot of people come into population and human health assessment through things like planning and environmental science, geography. There's various professional associations that are relevant and helpful. And importantly as well, professional experience and what's expected in terms of actually having done the job in order to lead on the assessment. So none of that is intended to be a requirement. This is to guide that decision on competency. There's related guidance that we've drawn on in preparing this standard. So there's the guidelines on information to be contained in environmental impact assessment reports from the EPA. There's also a health impact assessment guide that was published by the Institute of Public Health in 2021, and IEMA has recently, that's Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment, has recently published guidance as well on how to undertake human health assessment as part of an EIA. We've also, particularly for the population side, we've drawn on the Design Manual for Roads and Bridges guidance on population and human health, which is applicable to highway schemes in England. So it's a very broad topic. Population and human health encompasses a wide range of impacts. As you can imagine, there are a wide range of things that affect people, and a lot of these things are already considered in other topics within the options appraisal or the EIA. So population and human health is informed by outputs from a large number of topics, and the Venn diagram shows that some of those topics will be relevant to both population and human health assessment. Some are more health orientated and some more relevant to population. So what is it? What does it mean? Population and human health assessment are separate things, but there's a single standard for these things because really it's all about people, and it's all ultimately about people's well-being. So population, what we call population, is looking at specific resources, which include private property and housing, community land and assets, and business and development land, and users of those resources, and also non-motorised road users specifically, so pedestrians, cyclists and horse riders. The ways in which the resources can be impacted include demolition and land take, impacts on amenity value and access and severance. Human health. So the definition that we use for human health assessment, it comes from the World Health Organization, and it's a state of complete physical, mental and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So from that definition, when we talk about health, we're talking about a very broad definition of health, and mental health is embedded into the whole of the assessment. It's not something that we would do separately. Some people might be familiar with a rainbow diagram on the right. This is illustrating what's called the wider determinants of health. So that's the social, economic and environmental factors that determine people's health, as well as individual factors, characteristics. And finally, health equity is very important. So that's about looking at the distribution of impacts, either positive or negative, across different groups within the population, and with the aim of reducing differences in health equity and making the outcome more equitable. This is graphic taken from the standard, which is an illustration of the types of health determinants that might be scoped in to a human health assessment. The standard is clear that the scope should be determined by the health assessment practitioner. It's based on identifying changes to any of these determinants of health, as we call them, that are likely to actually lead to a change in health outcomes at the population level. And the scope needs to be proportionate and needs to be focused on likely significant effects. That can be done using what we call a source pathway receptor model. So this is just an illustration of that model. So the source is a project element and how that element affects a health determinant. So for example, provision of an improved cycle route would affect opportunities for physical activity, might have implications for other things like safety and connectivity. The pathway, this is just simply the means of transmission of that effect to the population. So clearly that, in this case, would be the fact that the local community would use the route, and the receptor is there a population present? And then we look at the sensitivity of that receptor. Sometimes that chain can be broken. So for example, in the second example on this table, there might be ground contamination present and there might be a population present, but there might be required mitigation measures that will be and are legally required to be incorporated to ensure that the material is contained and managed such that it will actually never reach the population, so there'd be no exposure. Therefore, that would be scoped out, and cross-referencing to the relevant topic would be included. So the standards applicable to phases 1 through to 4 of the PMG phases. So that's from concept and feasibility, options selection, design and evaluation, and the statutory process. At phase 0, there's no specialist input. However, the standard provides some guidance to project managers on how to consider population and human health at that stage. So, for example, when looking at strategic plans and programs and investigating feasibility of the project. Phase 1, that's concept and feasibility. The standards talks about how to identify a zone of influence, what sort of high-level baseline data should be collected at that stage, mapping of key constraints, plans, programs and policies to be reviewed, how to identify risks and opportunities for population and health, and inputs to the identification of strategic options and to the feasibility report. the options appraisal stage. So there are 3 stages to this. There's a preliminary options appraisal with a long list, and then the detailed options appraisal, and finally confirming the preferred option. The objectives at this stage are to make sure that population and human health effects are fully considered throughout this process, focusing on optimising outcomes for people and reducing inequalities. And what the standard aims to do is to make sure that the assessment of population and human health both adds value and avoids duplication. So thinking back to the slides on the definition of health and population assessment and what that includes, it's clear that there's going to be a very large number of overlaps between population and human health determinants and the appraisal criteria that are already included in multi-criteria analysis and transport appraisals. So what do we do about that, basically, and how do we avoid double counting? What the standard proposes is that the practitioner identifies a list that's robust, proportionate and project specific of the appraisal criteria that should be considered, and then undertakes a gap analysis to identify those criteria that are already being assessed, advise the project manager on any additional assessment that might be needed to fill in any gaps identified, and that might be by adding to another topic's scope and remit, or that might be something that the population and human health assessment team would do. And then there would be a narrative text. Oh, my lights have gone off. There would be a narrative text to summarise how population and human health has been considered, and to demonstrate that it's been fully considered. However, importantly, it's not proposed to be scored as an individual criterion in the appraisal, because that would clearly involve double counting. It's important to say that as part of this process, vulnerable groups and health equity need to be considered. So when we talk about vulnerable groups, we're talking about people whose health might be disproportionately affected. That might include low-income groups, people living in deprived communities, and older people, children, and so on. And so there might be some distributional analysis that may be done there by the population and human health team. Then we get into phase 3, assessment of the preferred option. So this takes us through the stages of environmental impact assessment, from scoping, assessment, enhancement and mitigation measures, identifying the residual effects, cumulative effects, and then the approach to monitoring and evaluation. Finally, inputs to the EIA report. There's quite a lot of information on this slide, which I won't read, but it's just to say that there's a lot of baseline data available, and the standard identifies the type of data and the sources and the geographic level of data that should be used in the assessment. There's also guidance and requirements for stakeholder engagement, so the types of stakeholders that should be engaged with, and guidance on how to engage most effectively with those stakeholders, including early engagement. The assessment is based on EPA guidance, which is based on looking at the magnitude of an impact and the sensitivity of the receptor. So there's specific sensitivity and magnitude criteria within the standard for both population and human health. The human health drawing on the IEMA guidance, which also provides criteria. It's a largely qualitative assessment, but it's based on professional judgment ultimately, but that is supported by quantitative data and evidence, and guidance is provided on how to work with other topics that may overlap with the health assessment, and also guidance on how to write up the conclusions of the health assessment. So a clear explanation of the rationale behind the qualitative approach, how the criteria have been applied, and cross-referencing where relevant to other topics, and also provision of any data to back up the conclusions. There is also guidance within the standard on how to go that step further and assess health outcomes from exposure to harmful substances or emissions quantitatively. So that's looking at specific outcomes, which might be mortality rates, hospital admissions, from things like exposure to noise and air quality impacts, and there are concentration response functions that are available that enable you to do that. It's not usually proportionate, and it's not usually going to yield meaningful results because the changes are going to be extremely small in most cases. However, on larger projects where you've got a significant shift in exposure, for example, it might be a bypass project where you've got transport emissions moving out of a very heavily populated area into a much less populated area, for example, it might be possible to quantify that change in terms of health outcomes. So there's guidance on how that's done, and equally important as to how, there's guidance on how to actually decide whether it is proportionate and whether it's the right thing to do. That's what the questions along the right-hand side of that slide are focusing on. So firstly, is it likely to yield significant results? And is it likely to actually benefit the decision-making process? Sometimes the driver for this is allaying concerns in the community, but it can also, because you're putting numbers to things, increase concerns potentially as well. So it's managing that. Although the standard doesn't go into phases 5 to 7 in detail, it does provide some guidance on the input that the population and human health practitioner might have at those stages. So, for example, updating on data and perhaps assessment if there's been a lot of time elapsed. Reviewing procedures for delivering committed mitigation during construction and implementation of a project, and reviewing the results of monitoring, and perhaps as part of the closeout review, lessons learned for future projects.
Okay, everyone, we're going to recommence now. So we've got our last presentations. It's going to be given by Eddie Winterlich. He's going to give us a few presentations on pavement. So Eddie's role in TII is senior management, pavement engineering and technology, and he's responsible for directing and managing the technical delivery of TII's pavement engineering and innovation activities, ensuring successful implementation across TII's annual pavement protection and renewals programme.
Hi everybody, not as big a clear out as I was yesterday when I stepped up. And you saw earlier the QR codes on presentations. That's a sure indication that I'm overstaying my welcome and need to go. There are no QR codes on these presentations, by the way. If something isn't clear on them and you want to query them, anything I say today, by all means, pop me an email. That's about at the level of my technology expertise. And at edward.winterlich@tii.ie. Or better still, pick up the phone and phone me at 087 911 6171. I'm going to give you 3 presentations now. The first one being based on publications we made last October, or changes to some of the standards that were there, specifically Series 900 and our Irish Analytical Pavement Design Method. And this first one will be around our complementary product category rules, which are the rules associated with the development of environmental product declarations. And the reference is DMPAV 03077. Keep looking for Olivier to keep me on the straight and narrow ways. Thank you. So just to give you an introduction to what environmental product declarations are, surrounding this entire topic, you're going to hear phrases like life cycle assessment, product category rules, complementary product category rules, and environmental product declarations. So essentially, I'm going to have to look up here because I can't see that. So essentially a life cycle assessment, compilation and evaluation of inputs, outputs, and the potential environmental impacts of a product system throughout its life cycle. And you see where we were going earlier on. You saw that whole concept of circular economy and stuff like that. So we're heading in that direction. It's everybody's focus. So it's all about life cycle assessment. To get there, we need environmental product declarations, and to get to that point you need a set of product category rules, and they're defined as a set of specific rules, requirements and guidelines for developing type 3 environmental declarations for one or more product categories. So that's kind of a generic product category rules, and that kind of covers all of the products, the set rules. But for specific products you need specific rules, and you need to be careful when you get into this area when it does eventually kick off that one company's EPD may not be the same as another company's EPD for the same product, because you don't really know unless you know what the rules surrounding the production of that document is, because they can vary. So what we did was we produced, in accordance with EN 15804, which is the overarching European document for sustainable production of construction products, we produced a complementary set of product category rules, which are group-specific or horizontal PCR, which provide additional compliant and non-contradictory requirements to EN 15804. So that's the rules associated with the development of our EPDs. What is an EPD? A claim which indicates the environmental aspects of a product or service and providing quantified environmental data using predetermined parameters and, where relevant, additional environmental information. So basically we have produced a set of product category rules, or complementary product category rules for bituminous products. These rules, this document is associated with bituminous mixtures only. Doesn't apply to anything else. You cannot produce an EPD for any other product other than a bituminous rule using this document. And it communicates verifiable, accurate and non-misleading environmental information for products and their applications, thereby supporting scientifically based fair choices. So verifiable and accurate. There's a whole ecosystem surrounding the development of EPDs, and they're independently verified. And that's important. So it's important to be able to compare an EPD for an AC product, an AC20 product from one producer to an AC product from another producer. Again, actual detail, you need to know what that document contains in terms of the concepts and what information you might like to see or understand. But really that document is targeted towards producers in the development of EPDs, and gives them choices of unit processes if they don't have their own data, that they can use a default value initially until they get their own data. The context for all of this, well, it's in our strategic documents, and our purpose is to provide sustainable transport infrastructure and services. So again, further to the circular economy stuff, this is what it's all about. This is where the whole industry and the whole roads industry is going, and the whole country is in response to climate difficulties. Our vision is to be leaders in the delivery and operation of sustainable transport infrastructure and services. And we are leaders. We are leaders in terms of the amount of RAP we're allowing, or recycled asphalt we're allowing into our mixtures. We're ahead of Europe. We're ahead of Europe in the development of EPDs, bar maybe the Dutch. And in fact, as of a couple of days ago, the European programme operator for EPDs is verifying our document and taking it on board and using it as a template document for other member states. And then, of course, the secret to all of this is that we need to, again, going back, and I'm going to keep going on about it, is the circular economy stuff that Esther was talking about and Janet were talking about earlier. It's all about sustainability. We prioritise sustainability in our decision making, and that's what the earlier exercise was all about. Collaboration is really, really critical here, and we've developed these documents completely in collaboration with our industry. So the bituminous industry in Ireland is fully behind this, and they are fairly well advanced. They're not going to hit their deadlines, but that's because of that whole ecosystem surrounding this topic that I spoke about. And they're constantly coming and marching to me, looking to innovate. And what we're trying to do in terms of our values is to create value relevant to our purpose through the application of new and better solutions. So that's what it's all about, and that's where we're going with it. Again, within you would have heard Ger talking about our asset management objectives, and then the development of EPDs fits in there in terms of environment and sustainability. Again, if you look at all of the other documents associated with the development of a pavement asset repair and renewal scheme, you'll see in the approval procedures, the overall strategic objective of the PAR procedures is to maintain the overall asset value for the minimum life cycle costs. So it's all again about life cycle assessment and presenting opportunities to reduce both the economic and environmental costs. In the principles associated with PAR schemes, the selection of the optimal solution for pavement repair and renewal exercise requires an optioneering exercise to be carried out to minimise the whole life cycle costs, and all about dealing with sustainability and making sustainable decisions within that process. Again, within our sustainability implementation plan, we look to deliver end-to-end improvements. And basically what we're about to do is, what we're trying to do is to identify 20 to 30 materials or products, and to continue to encourage industry to develop EPDs, or where we can't develop product category rules for those documents, that they produce their own product category rules. So basically, it's, as I said earlier, this document is specific to bituminous products only. It's specific to Ireland only, and it allows producers to declare product-specific environmental performance, which you will then in turn use that information to inform your designs for pavement schemes or pavements on new schemes. And basically, what we're trying to do is to facilitate the comparison of products from different producers. Now, the original line on that presentation said to facilitate comparison of different products by different producers, which is strictly not correct. This is the correct thing, which Olivier very kindly stuck in. The EPD of one product cannot be compared to the EPD of another product unless both products have the same technical performances. But from a design, and that's from maybe when this eventually gets into a procurement process, that's true. But at a design level, you could look at a design of a pavement and say, what's my environmental impact of a pavement design that has a 100 mil or 200 mil of AC32 in its base? What if I look at my EPDs for 100 mil of AC32 base and 100 mil of a hydraulically bound material? And how does that compare environmentally using the EPDs for those products? And in that case, that statement is not true. So basically, again, within that document, you're going to hear a lot of talk or see a lot of talk about system boundaries. And this chart is from 15804, and basically for bituminous products, for an EPD for the bituminous product, we're pretty much talking about this system boundary here between A1 and A5, where we're talking about the production stage and the construction stage based on a default value for a distance in terms of distance to the site. But ultimately where we're going is, and we're trying to develop, is a life cycle analysis tool whereby you can look at your project and you can develop an environmental product declaration for your project incorporating all of the EPDs from the product. That again is a work in progress, and it aligns with earlier you heard Ger talk about the environmental module, the environmental management system for DTIMS, where the lads in asset management are determining a life cycle assessment of the payment programme. What we're then going to filter that and align, hopefully, is a tool where you can develop the life cycle assessment of a project, which will feed back in to the programme. That's a work in progress, and hopefully we'll have something on that, possibly not this year, but probably early next year. So the framework of where we're at then is basically, this is where we're at now. We have product category rules developed from bituminous mixtures, which is the life cycle assessment of the mixture, and that will develop product specific EPDs. As part of this life cycle assessment tool, we will be developing product category rules for all of the other products that you see across there, which will ultimately feed into a life cycle assessment for the structure or for the project. And that's a work in progress, so that's coming down the tracks. The reason it's, again, why I say we're leaders in terms of our purpose and our values, we're leaders in this area, is that these don't exist anywhere. The Dutch had a version of this which we used to develop our own, but these don't exist across Europe, so we're actually leading the way in that regard for those type of products. Now, forgive me if I'm going to be a little bit convoluted here, but you will be aware that as of October last year in Series 900, it's a mandatory requirement for your producer as part of your contracts to give you an EPD. What we did with industry was, so that was October 23, we published that and published it in. If we hadn't done that, we'd still be waiting. So it was kind of, we're making it mandatory, you need to get on industry and produce these documents and get on with the process. So we gave them a 6-month lead-in period, which ended at the end of last month, the other day. And I don't think any of you have seen an EPD yet. So there is a problem. Industry, I know industry are working hard, and every expert within that whole EPD area is employed and busy working with industry to produce it. So they're at an advanced stage, but they haven't met the deadlines. And there is, as I said, a whole ecosystem around this area which needs to align before we can actually really insist, like CE marking, that unless you give me an EPD for this particular product, you're not getting the job. We're just a little bit away, months away from that. And the ecosystem I'm talking about is that the industry have to produce all this information and gather all that data and produce the information. That information has to be independently verified. Those independent verifiers are like hen's teeth. They don't exist very often. So that's a barrier. There is the product category rules that we talked about have to be adopted by what's called an EPD program operator. The Irish program operator is the Irish Green Building Council, and that's fine. But if some of the producers are going to use some of the European program operators, they haven't quite adopted our product category rules, but they're about to. So that's another barrier. And then finally, the construction product regulations currently, in its current format, does not kind of facilitate green procurement and that whole environmental element very well. And that's currently been updated and is about to be published, as far as I'm aware. I was expecting that it would be published around now, but I think it's probably out towards the end of the year. So it's getting all of those organisations, our individuals, our aspects aligned before we can actually decide that it's mandatory. Series 900 says it's mandatory, but if you look at CCSPW 001, which is the introduction to our standards, there's a paragraph in there that deals with EPDs that says unless all that aligns, then the production of EPDs to your contracts is voluntary. So just be gentle with industry when you're about to sign them off on a contract over the summer. If they don't have an EPD, ask them where are they at in the process and how far away are they, and will you provide it when you have it, and so on and so forth. But they will get there. It's just a little bit of a delay, and I will write to you to highlight that and to detail that in the coming weeks. How do EPDs benefit you? Well, you can see it all there. It's access to environmental performances of pavement products available in your locality, design of sustainable solutions, essential part of the implementation of circular economy, as you saw earlier on, and an opportunity to collaborate with your industry to promote lower emission pavement products. That's what it's all about. Any quick questions, or will we wait till the end? Okay. I don't know, when did we introduce IAPDM? Some time ago, we published our Irish Analytical Pavement Design Method. This again is, I'm going to use the word mandatory. Everything I talk about today is mandatory. You must do it. You don't have a choice in it. This is a analytical pavement design method, and the supporting document for that is the MPAV 03021. It replaces this system here, which was the empirical method where you read off your pavement thickness by off that chart. That document is now withdrawn. However, actually, IAPDM does not deal with concrete pavements. The older method does. So if you want to have a burning desire to design a concrete pavement, by all means, go and unwithdraw that one and use it. But I don't think you'll get very far with TII. But anyway, there you go. Knock yourself out. What the IAPDM does then, 03021 does, it introduces these workflows to guide you through the process. Both this document and the system itself, which is on our web portal, are mandatory, and you must use them in terms of pavement design for both overlays, inlays, maintenance works, and new works. It facilitates a web-based mechanistic empirical pavement structural evaluation, optimises pavement material use, compare designs with innovative materials, and there are 2 design levels within it, and that's a screenshot of it there. If you want access to it, and there are some 300 registered users of it, give me an email at iapdm@tii.ie, and we will get you set up on the system where you can access it. Again, it's the pillar of circular economy in terms of pavements, a central pillar. So we are in the process of producing an IAPDM user's guide, which will allow the correct implementation of the MPAV and support. So there's a guide document to support all of that. We have delivered some online tutorials, and we will continue to do that over the coming time. I think we've done 2, have we? Or did we done 3? 2. And we'll probably do one again later on this year, and see how we go. But I'm hoping the guide document will take over that role. The guide document provides worked examples of common design problems on IAPDM implementation, examples of new pavement design, existing pavement and strengthening and overlay designs, and response to common challenges experiences by users today. And some of our local authority colleagues in the room today provided some valuable feedback to that document, and all of those comments that came back from users on issues that they found with it have been incorporated, and we're about to publish that on the 24th of May. So you'll see that, and any feedback on that document will be very welcome. And then the online tutorials, we'll give another one, another go at that later on in the year. Jonathan will advise when that happens. So essentially, that just demonstrates the development of the IAPDM. It's a mechanistic empirical pavement design. The mechanistic is looking at the performance of the materials, and the empirical modelling behind it is actually, we dug up parts of the M50 which did not go down well, and we determined the performance of those Irish materials in that Irish scenario, which is incorporated into the modelling of that. And it involves modelling of Irish environmental and loading conditions, and it looks at cracking and deformation as a failure mechanism. That's how it's developed. There are 2 levels of design currently in it. Level 1, which is the bog standard and is based on Series 900 materials. Level 2 then is a little bit more involved and introduces other requirements in terms of stiffness and fatigue, and a whole validation process on the materials that will be proposed to use. Mostly from pavement asset repair and renewal. Most local authorities are working at level 1, but don't object. I don't object anyway, and would welcome some interaction with colleagues in local authorities to look at maybe some schemes at design level on an overlay basis at design level 2, and how that might operate. Design level 3, it was in the original version, but basically that's targeted, it's not there now, that's targeted at purely performance-based design. That's taken the shackles off completely in terms of grading, binder contents and so on, and it's given me a pavement that lasts 20 years. I don't really care what's in it. I won't see a level 3 in my lifetime, I don't think, but certainly it's in there. There are some changes that we are considering and working on. It's the whole concept of geogrids, and what does a geogrid bring to a pavement design, and how do we incorporate that into our design method. We did some trials up in Donegal, which we're analysing at the moment. Again, down the line. Material design levels. So if you're looking at design level 2, you're into looking at these categories of stiffness and fatigue and implementing that into your design. And as I say, it's looking at hugely a different evaluation. The system has the screen to manage projects. It looks at material database, which you can add to, which you can incorporate into your designs, and then a workflow which is an iterative process whereby you put in your pavement design in terms of materials and thicknesses, and you run the system, and you get an output that tells you you're good to go here and here, but you're not so good to go here. You might have to revisit this and do something different. Any burning questions on that, or do you want to wait till the end? Okay. Series 900 then. We have made, and I beg your forgiveness, we have made changes to this fairly regularly over the years, but I think we're probably at the end of significant changes. There will be minor changes and bringing maybe newer materials into Series 900 or newer processes, but the significant changes are now done. It started back in 2012 when we completely turned industry on top of its head, and we moved away from the whole British standard method of specifying materials, and we went more the European direction, and start specifying on a performance basis, performance-related basis. And that kicked off the last 10 years of my life, which I won't ever get back. Basically, the changes as of last October then were there was 3 elements to it. There's 4 elements. The EPDs was the 4th element, which is not mentioned here, which I forgot about. But essentially, the major change is around reclaimed asphalt and increasing the quantities there. We introduced a surface course preservation system that we will allow to be used on the network. And then we introduced warm mixes and some changes and some temperature specifics around that. So they're the 3 areas which I'm going to go through kind of individually. So in terms of increasing allowable recycled asphalt content, we've gone from what was 30% up to 70%, but we've gone in phases. We've increased the level of an additional, in terms of that change then, we've additional recycled asphalt and mixture evaluation procedures. And basically there's 3 areas of that. The first one being the characteristics of your recycled asphalt, and this is what needs to be considered by the producer. He needs to know exactly the content of his recycled asphalt and the characteristics of it. Depending on the level of addition of recycled asphalt, you need to look at these elements of your mixture design. And in terms of the works, then there are additional requirements to the performance of the works. Then again, depending on the quantity and the quantity of recycled asphalt that you're adding to the mix. Basically, what we've done is we've split it in 3, and we allow it to be added up to 20%. At less than 20%, less than or equal to 20% addition, pretty much standard fare. You're probably getting it now, or you were always probably getting. You were certainly getting 10%, and we're not that worried or concerned about it. If you're adding between 20 and 50%, there are much more stricter and much more detailed requirements that the mixture has to be assessed to, and indeed the feedstock has to be assessed before that. And then if you're greater than 50%, and most of Europe are at 50%, but between 50 and 70%, then it gets even more detailed and gets more strict. And in terms of the management of the feedstock, which is absolutely critical, at less than 20%, you can see how the different levels. 1 per 2,000 tonne tests. Between 20 and 50%, we're at 1 per 1,000, and at greater than 50%, 1 per 500. There are essentially, and I'm open to correction on this, and probably you guys will know more than me, but my understanding of it is most of the industry are here at less than 20. There's probably 2 or 3 or maybe 4 of the bigger companies around the country who are between 20 and 50. And if you're adding recycled asphalt to your mixture in a cold process in production, most of the plants, in fact all of the plants in the country, will be limited to 40%. None of them will go higher than that. If you're going higher than 50%, or if you're at 50% or higher, you're basically, you need to preheat the recycled asphalt, and there's only one company in the country currently doing that. And that introduces a concern with the propensity of local authorities wanting to keep the RAP for themselves. That causes a bit of a catch-22 situation, in that we need industry to have as much RAP as they can, because they need to, unless they're getting it, they're not going to invest in their plant, and if they're not getting it, then we're not going to be able to produce more and more RAP, and we're not going to be able to sustain it. So it's a little bit of a catch-22 situation. So just be conscious of that. Again, what Esther and Janet were producing earlier in terms of circular economy, what's the best way to manage that? Ensuring quality then, so section 9 of Series 900 really deals with the whole concept of RAP, and the first aspect of that is 9.3 in terms of storage. So I've just given a quote there: reclaimed asphalt pavement and reclaimed asphalt feedstock protection and handling, in red, has a significant impact on the quality of the reclaimed asphalt and the resulting bituminous mixture. What's really important here, and it's a minor point, but it's a major point by the same token. Language is hugely important. If somebody starts talking to me about RAP, what I understand by that is it's reclaimed asphalt pavement. It's in the back of a truck that's come off a road from a planer. That's RAP. When that goes back to a producer and is crushed and screened into various different stockpiles and sizes, and the binder content, the recovered binder is assessed, it becomes reclaimed asphalt and it becomes a constituent. So the RAP and the RA, we're talking about two different things. And most of the industry don't know that. And it does my head in. So all of that information there is hugely important. And what's really, really important then from your perspective is feedstock data sheets, which are contained within our notes for guidance, shall be included in a mixture type test report where feedstock is a constituent of the mixture. And it's that type test report is the most critical document in your suite of, in your armoury when it comes to awarding contracts. CE marking, I'm not interested in it. That's a legal requirement and you're getting it anyway. If you have a problem with your pavement at some point, somebody like me is going to be coming knocking on your door and he's going to want to see the type test report. And particularly in the context of recycled asphalt pavement and RA recycled asphalt and the quantities that are added, it's that type test report is the most critical document that you need to know. And it needs to contain all of this information. Now, I'll throw the soapbox out the window. Mixture design then, there's a whole raft of stuff that you need to look at, and the penetration of the combined virgin and the recovered binder shall be calculated as detailed below. So there's a formula within the document which allows you to balance that mixture between the reclaimed binder content and the virgin binder content that you need to add it. Not all RAP, the amount that you can add, or the principle of the document is that reclaimed binder quality determines the quantity of RAP that you can add. Again, the type test report is the most important aspect of it, and an interesting conversation you can have. You can have a little bit of fun here with the industry, and you can say that an individual type test report shall be produced for each mixture according to the quantity of reclaimed asphalt used. Now, that's an interesting topic because the quality of my reclaimed asphalt last week could be different to my reclaimed asphalt this week. And therefore I can't add as much, or I can add more. And in that case, I should really, in theory, produce a new type test report. But yet the construction product regulations say that if nothing changes, you only have to produce a type test report every 5 years. Currently, I would suggest that you're getting one type test report based on a mixed design, based on an addition rate. That's it. And as I say, that's a task that we need to do, is to have an audit of industry and see how that's been managed. As I say, it could be a little bit of fun that you could have. Works requirements then, we have introduced again for addition rates greater than 20%. There's a whole raft of stuff that's different that you need to do. The next topic then is warm mixes. We now allow additives to produce a warm mix under specification. You need to, if you want it, you need to use a particular mixture designation, and within Series 900 then there are minimum delivery and rolling temperatures associated with warm mixes which weren't there before. Currently, mix designation, if you ask for this, it's going to come to you hot, if you specify it like that. If you want it warm, and that's a quote from, that's a line taken from Series 900, put in the W after that, and you'll get a warm mix. We're struggling to get local authorities to specify warm mix because I don't think they're quite catching that. Industry are ready. Everybody, as far as I understand, can produce it, and you can get a quick win here in your sustainability plans by specifying warm mixes. And you should be doing it. And we're fully supportive of you. I'm currently working with my colleagues in asset management to produce a case to change this, to completely flip this around and make warm mixes the default mixture. That hopefully will happen sometime over the rest of the year. But it's what we intend to do. So I would encourage everybody to, when you're filling in your Appendix 7.1, put that W in there and you'll get warm mixes. As I say, it's a quick win. The other change to Series 900 in October was the introduction of these surface course preservation systems, which are really about softening your existing, the binder in your existing pavement and improving the penetration grade of it. What we require, if you're going to use these, we require provisional type approval installation trial to accompany your documentation, your works proposals. We've adopted this product into our Series 900 on the basis of a trial we did, several trials we did on both HRA and SMA, where the retarded significant chip loss on the M1 was one where they were about to plane it up, and they still haven't planed it up. It's working well. What it does is it penetrates the full depth, and we've proved it within our trial that the preservative treatment penetrates the full depth of the wearing course and changes the properties of the bitumen and softens it and gives you a little bit of extra life. Be very careful. There are two types of systems. One is penetrative, one is non-penetrative. Number two being essentially known as a sunscreen. And you can see the extent of my IT skills, what's good and what's not good. Number two is a snake oil. You don't want to use it and you won't be allowed to use it. Use a penetrative treatment, and there is only one product on the market at the moment as far as I understand it. There were changes in October to Series 900 notes for guidance, and basically it's just to try and demonstrate the management of the feedstock from a RAP to an RA, and what it entails or what it should entail. And this document here is a template that you should ask industry to append to their type test report. And I think that's it from me.
Okay, thank you, Eddie. So I'll just take your attention for a couple of minutes just to talk through the publications that we're going to make between now and the end of the year, because there's been a lot of work, as you've heard from the presenters today. So we're actually running a publication in May, should be the last week of May. So there'll be an updated standard for managing geotechnical risk, a new technical guidance document that Ed has spoken about for IAPDM, also revised updated notes for guidance for Series 800, the unbound and bound granular material. An interim technical advice note is coming for dynamic testing of safety barriers, And then we're going to have a new suite of documents for landscaping, which will be new standards, overarching technical guidance documents, and standard construction details. Then later on in the year, there's going to be another archaeological publication for radiocarbon dating of samples, the population and human health assessment requirements that Jenny spoke about earlier, updates to Series 600, and then we're going to have a ground investigation guidance document and a document on bridge aesthetics. So quite a busy year still ahead. Just to let you know of some upcoming training that's going to happen towards the end of May, the 28th of May. It's for Earthworks Mass Hall and Earthworks Analysis Tool Training Day. So if anyone's interested in attending that, then they can please email the address given here. Pointed to work. I'll leave that slide up so you can write it down. So it's going to be on Tuesday the 28th of May in TII Parkgate Street. And that's it. So now I'll hand over to Albert, I believe, to close up this session.
Okay, well, listen, thank you very much for coming. I'd like to say a few thank yous, particularly to the organisers of the session, particularly to Esther and our own TII team. Also our consultants, the technical support that we get primarily from ARUP and from ACOM and other organisations that we use within TII. So thank you very much for that. I'm hoping you're finding these sessions useful. If you do have any comments, any general comments, or indeed any queries or questions that you've had from the technical presentations, please use InfoPubs, and we promise that we will get back to you. We find that information very, very useful. If you've even got any general queries about TI Publication System itself, please also let us know. There's probably lots of new users coming into the system now, so it would be great, particularly if some of your younger colleagues, please encourage them to let us know to see if we can make changes that could be beneficial. We are actually revamping the publication sites as we speak, and it will be relaunched probably in the next 3 to 4 or 5 months, but hopefully you won't see any difference. The main thing is that it's going to be going, we're going to store it in the cloud rather than our own servers, so it should increase it should increase the security of the system, but it should also increase the availability of the system. Less downtime, because it will require less manual interventions and things like that. So I thank the presenters. Thank you for not just the presenters that were speaking today, but also the big teams behind those, because they're not the slides that you see. I'm sure Eddie will take full credit for everything that is shown on these slides. But there's actually a fair number of people behind that, within TII, within our technical advisors, and even among yourselves as well. So thank you for that. And also, obviously, thank you for your attendance here today. It's very useful. It's very grateful to see that people are listening to us. And as I said, I do hope you find it useful. That's really all I want to say. So thank you very much. I am actually retiring from TII myself in the next few weeks. So this will be my last session of this. But I would certainly leave you in the capable hands of the people to see around the room. So thank you very much for your attention, and safe home all. Thank you.